Good morning, everyone. We have quite a crew joining us today. Welcome. We're going to allow another minute or so for people to continue joining us. All right, we might have people joining us as we start, but since we've got so much to get through and such amazing presenters to hear from, we will get started nice and quickly. Very first off, I'll just introduce myself. My name's Claire Ripper. I'm the Manager of Lived Experience here at the Alcohol, Tobacco and Other Drug Council of Tasmania. So I want to begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land in which we are gathering and meeting from today. We're obviously online, so we are going to be having people joining us from all over the state, potentially even interstate, who knows? So acknowledging and paying respect to all elders, past and present, of all of these different lands that we are joining here from. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders peoples that are joining us today as well. I'd also like to thank and acknowledge those people that are here today with living and lived experience of alcohol and other drug use, and extend my respect to you and highlight the importance of your voice and the experience and knowledge you bring to these meetings. So thank you all. We have 80 people registered for our peer work symposium today. It's an incredible turnout. You will notice Rosina's supporting us through our session today, and we have the Q&A function if people have questions as we go through presentations. Rosina's also going to put an amended agenda in that chat because we've had a last minute rejig of things this morning with someone unwell, not able to present. Just as a little bit of housekeeping, I'll ask for people to keep their microphones on mute so that we don't get any echoing and background noise. If you have any questions, I prefer you to put them in the chat rather than raising your hand, as we do have quite a tight time frame. So we have an opportunity for questions at the end of everyone's presentations, and we'll be able to get to them towards the end of the session. The session today will be recorded and it will be uploaded onto our website for people to access. So if you don't wish to be recorded, please turn your videos off. If you don't mind, then it would be great to see your faces on the screen. It's always nicer to present to people when you can see their faces as well. So if you're comfortable to do so, it'd be lovely to see you. All right. So our first presenter we have today is Callum Thompson. I'm hoping we have Callum joining us already.
Callum isn't in yet. I've just sent a follow-up email to see where he's at, but I haven't had back yet. So yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll give you a quick little overview of Callum. Callum has recently finished his Masters of Clinical Psychology at the University of Tasmania, and he's completed his thesis exploring the experiences of alcohol and other drug peer workers in Tasmania. So within 3 years of professional experience in both the AOD and housing sectors, Callum brings a unique perspective that bridges academic research and practical on-the-ground work. So his passion for supporting marginalised communities is evident in his commitment to understanding and amplifying the voices of those with lived experience. Callum's insights are informed by a deep understanding of the challenges and opportunities within the AOD sector. I'm going to ask everyone for just give me one quick moment because I have a feeling someone might have joined a different meeting. Bear with me just a moment, sorry. Sorry, everyone. Callum has joined the wrong meeting, so we'll just give him a quick minute to join into this one, and we should be able to get started. Love a bit of technical difficulty. Just as a quick, I guess, opportunity to fill the space a little.
Sorry, just a quick heads up. Just spoke to him. He was having some technical difficulties. Just joining like the next couple seconds.
Fabulous. Just a quick overview of the agenda changes. Unfortunately, we haven't had Maria Duggan has become unwell and not able to present alongside us today. So we've had a rejig of when people are presenting. And you'll see in the amended agenda that Rosina's put into the chat how that change will look.
Callum's here.
Fabulous. Hi, Callum, welcome. I've just done
Hi,
your
everyone.
little spiel about yourself. So welcome. Thank you for joining us. Great to have you here with us. And are you able to share your slides?
Can do.
Perfect. Well, the floor's yours.
Fantastic. All right, we'll get this going. Of course, now I can't see where the share slides aspect is.
I'm happy to share it for you, Callum, if you want me to.
Yeah, I think that might be the go.
Yeah. Ready, yes.
Thank you very much. So thank you very much, Sinclair, for introducing me. But yes, I recently graduated from a Masters of Clinical Psychology, and part of that, I completed a thesis, and my topic was, as you can see here, how can Tasmanian AOD peer workers best be utilised? So going on to the next slide. So a bit of a study overview here. So first of all, introducing what an AOD peer worker is. So like you can see here, someone with lived experience of substance use and recovery. And this was an initial one, but we're very wary of using the term recovery. Some people with lived experience or lived experience workers are still in the phase of substance use. But when they're in the peer work role, they're employed to support others undergoing similar experiences. Why this research was important. So as you can see here, I've sort of noted that the AOD peer worker population in Tasmania is quite small, but it is growing. And there's actually been minimal research conducted on what peer workers in the state, but there is quite a lot of research that we've seen in other states in Australia as well as across the world that's explored peer worker experiences. and their understanding of their roles. This research was also important because of new paid roles or new funding that had been provided by the government in the last couple of years here in Tassie. And I was lucky enough to interview some peer workers when they were provided or initially gained these roles. So it was really interesting to see some of their insights into the process of application and then the changes that the funding and being paid consistently for these roles was having for these workers. And then just a general study aim here. So exploring the experiences of AOD peer workers here in Tasmania and how their roles can be more appropriately utilised in the various organisations that they're working with. Thank you. So methodology. So I interviewed 8 peer workers from across Tasmania. So as I mentioned earlier, it's quite a small population here in Tasmania of peer workers. Well, we have a small population in general, especially compared to the rest of Australia. And yeah, that was reflected in the peer worker population. So quite difficult to get a hold of a lot of the peer workers. And then 5 of these peer workers actually completed 2 interviews. So the second round of interviews was about 6 months after the first round. And it was around the time when people were securing roles as funded by the Tasmanian government, which again was really exciting. And I was very lucky to be able to speak to people in general, the peer workers, but also at this time as well. So from the research, there were 5 different themes that almost overarching themes that were identified from the interviews. So these are the 5. So the benefits of employing peer workers. So this one was looking at how peer workers are crucial for bridging the gap between clients and professionals, and noting benefits not only to clients, but also organisations that were employing peer workers and to the peer workers themselves. Then role appraisal, so an understanding of peer workers and their experiences in the role as a peer worker. Future desires, so any changes that peer workers were hoping. These sort of things included things like greater stability, more paid positions, and clearer role definitions. And then training appraisal, which I think is going to be discussed much more in depth later on, which would be awesome to hear. And from what peer workers were telling me is that their experiences with the training, particularly with the Den, were really positive and really integral for their confidence in the role as a peer worker. And then this last one here of support evaluation. So this was the peer workers talking about their support from their upper management or more direct management, as well as colleagues as well. So what I've done is just broken down each of the 5 themes, given a couple of important sub-themes. Hopefully that doesn't confuse anyone, but these sub-themes also had some really important quotes that I thought was really important to capture in this presentation. So first off, client impact was one of those sub-themes. So peer workers have a strong positive effect on client engagement and recovery, was what a lot of peer workers were feeding to me. And this really great quote of, I'm someone that's there, that's been where people are. I feel like I can eliminate some unnecessary suffering in people's lives. Another sub-theme was hope and relatability. So clients were viewing peer workers as, or do view peer workers as, a representation of hope and recovery. So another quote, seeing a peer worker is a representation of hope. You're representing something that works. Another thing that I would like to quickly add is that some of the peer workers were in positions of being clients, and there were peer workers before them who weren't paid in those roles, but they were able to look to them as that hope for their recovery or reintegration into a life that was more fulfilling. Role appraisal, so role ambiguity, lack of organisational readiness. So a lot of peer workers found roles didn't really have clear definitions. This is something that, because the peer work role is very new, it's actually, well, not necessarily new, but hasn't had enough research done to really clarify what the peer work role involves. It really made it difficult for some workers to contribute and led to some confusion and frustration about what was expected. Alternatively, though, other workers actually thrived with this and really felt confident in their role and felt supported in navigating what this role involved. So as you can see here, a few of the peer workers were quite unsure of what was expected of them with those quotes. And then job satisfaction. So a lot of peer workers were really grateful to be able to help clients and help them with their recovery and their recovery journey. And just this really simple quote, I've just found it so rewarding. It was really seen throughout all of the peer workers and their responses. But again, those vague role expectations really were not helpful for a lot of the workers. Jumping on to the next slide. Role appraisal, as you can tell, I've given it 2 slides because there was just so much to cover. And I really would love to cover more, but I don't have enough time. But yes, organisational delay and criminal history impact. So this was particularly noted in the second round of interviews where people were getting paid roles. There was some pretty significant delay of being hired. Also significant frustration with this. So, for example, this client in April 2023 said, I know there have been years who've been hired, but as far as having their first paycheck, I still don't think they've had one. And the funding was granted in November of last year. So there's that 4-month gap that a lot of people did have. Jumping on to the next slide. Well, actually, before we jump on to support or the next slide, very, very lucky. I think we all are that got a guest speaker here. One of the peer workers, Ben, has agreed to share some of his experiences. I think I'm very lucky to have been able to have conducted these interviews, but at the end of the day, these words are from the peer workers. So awesome to have Ben here to share a bit of his experience and really add to and really help with some of these quotes and experiences really hitting home.
Yeah, g'day. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Yeah, so my name's Ben. Thanks for that, Callum. Lucky is definitely one way to describe it. Not sure everyone would, but nah, cool. Here we go. So I've just basically responded to one of the points, I guess, which was the benefits of employing peer workers. Peer workers evaluate their roles, etc. So I've been in an extraordinary position to have been able to see the service provision of AOD peer worker rolled out across Tasmania since its pre-COVID inception. I was among the first group of peer workers trained in the state with input from various stakeholders, including the DEN, or the Drug Education Network, SHARC, which is a Victorian-based peer worker led organisation, and the participating organisations that were accommodating the peer workers, such as Holyoake, Salvation Army, I think even the Link, just to name a few. So after some considerable time, one by one, we commenced working within our respective organisations, and a couple of others being employed in casual hours up to 1 or 2 days on average per week, which gave me some insight into the industry from a worker perspective. I believe there had been some readiness training or information provided to the workplaces. In any case, I was assured from the very beginning I would be treated and viewed as a co-worker and as an equal, which obviously is a shift from once upon a time being a client. This transition, in my experience, was completely organic and not tokenistic in any way, shape or form. My fellow YFCC peer workers and myself felt very comfortable and welcomed and valued. These casual days were short-lived though, due to what I put down to probably government allocated resources, and some time passed before I applied and was interviewed for a full-time peer worker role within YFCC, and which came with a specific work plan. And this role saw me working across Devonport and Burnie regional areas. I was provided with a vehicle, a fuel card, keys to the buildings, and was employed working alongside AOD counsellors as part of our ATODS team, which is alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs, and among the other teams providing various services to the greater community. So I saw out a 12-month contract in this role, which in many respects was to be the formation of peer work at YFCC and part of the peer work movement in Tasmania. It was incredibly gratifying. I facilitated group work, attended residential AOD facilities regularly, had a caseload of up to 20 people, give or take, at a time, ranging in age and circumstances, and predominantly are most well matched and implemented for my life experience, being those navigating the community corrections pathways. And the whole experience was a huge part of my sort of long-term recovery. And so again, due to funding, my role was slightly reduced in days of the week, which unfortunately was not enough for me to sustain being in the role in terms of income. So I have returned full-time to my previous workplace. However, I still work part-time at YFCC, which I'm really, really happy about. That's all I've got.
Awesome. Thanks, Ben. And this was the sort of information and experience that I was, again, really lucky to hear and be able to put down on paper and share with all of you. And I think it's important to note that these roles, these peer work roles, have had some massive benefits for a lot of the workers. And I think Ben is one of those. Hopefully there is a chance later to ask Ben some more questions and hear more of his story. Whether he wants to actually share more of that or not, I don't know. But just quickly running through the last couple of slides. So this next one, training appraisal, as I said earlier, and I think as most of us will likely know, that's going to be covered further. But I just wanted to highlight how important the DEN training was for all peer workers. Now into support evaluation. So there was a general consensus of support from immediate supervisors, and especially after workers were employed for several months in their roles and they got comfortable with colleagues and support supervision sessions, those sorts of things. So I think what was fairly common with some of the with the peer workers, not everyone. There were some challenges with upper management. So there was a real feeling of disconnect from upper management with a lot of insufficient communication or recognition from leadership. So just this quote, "I've never been introduced to the manager." There's that detachment from people as a staff member. So for some workers, that integration into the role wasn't as smooth as they would have liked. Just on to the next, please. And future desires. So massive one was a desire for stability and paid roles, which is the same as all of us, I would assume. Peer workers really express the need for more paid roles. The current amount is awesome, but definitely wasn't covering all, at that time, 36 people that had gone through the DENS training. So a lot of people were missing out and being lost to the peer work or AOD sector. So yeah, a lot of confusion. So this comment of, it's just that this only 6-month contract, so I don't know what's going to happen after that. And having a paid position would give you a better quality of life. And one last little bit was around desire for recognition. So some of workers also noted that there wasn't a lot of recognition in the actual workplace. So as you can see here, the comment of, there's not even posters up to say we have peer workers here. So not only did staff not really know why peer workers were there, what their roles involved, but also clients didn't actually know they could access peer workers in some workplaces. So to quickly wrap up, so clearly from what I'm seeing and from a lot of other research, we can say that peer workers are providing invaluable support, but there are definitely areas for improvement in their integration into the workplace. So if we can get some clearer role definitions, some improved organisational readiness, which I know has been quite a big topic in this space, and also appropriate integration into the workplace in general, and then that financial stability, we're going to see hopefully that sustainable role in place for peer workers. And just finally, strengthening these recommendations will allow for the AOD sector to really benefit from peer workers, ranging from organisations to clients themselves. Now, I know I've taken a bit of time, so thank you all for being patient. I probably just quickly go to Claire. I did have a bit of time for one of the other peer workers to have a chat, but we were all aware of time might be quite short, so I don't know, Claire, whether there is any time for that or we need to go on to the next.
Yeah, we'll need to shift on to the next. I'm sorry, Callum. Right. If we have an opportunity at the end, that would be great. But we are tight. We've got several other presentations to come through as well. So thank you so very much, Callum. Thank you very much, Ben. It was really great to hear from you both and all of this incredible work that you've been undertaking. Our next presentation is from Emily Chase. So Emily is the CEO of the Drug Education Network. Welcome, Emily. She's been the CEO since February 2023, and she joined DEN, Drug Education Network, at the end of the 3-year peer work training project. She very quickly realised the significance of the project and its impact on the emerging AOD peer workforce in Tasmania. So since the completion of this project in June 2023, Emily has continued to advocate for adequate and appropriate training for AOD peer workers, including as a member of the Lived Experience Training for the LEX Training Hub Steering Committee. Welcome, Emily, and thank you.
Thank you, Claire. It's always an interesting experience for me speaking on this project, given I did kind of hop in right at the end of it. But the best thing for me was that by that stage I was starting to see some of these paid roles creep in, and then obviously seeing the peers that have been through the training really starting to thrive in those roles. So I missed all the teething bits and the tricky bits at the start of a project and have just been able to enjoy the outcomes. So I'm speaking particularly today about training. I'll briefly give some background to the project that Den undertook in partnership with Holyoake, Salvation Army, YFCC, and then from the second year also City Mission. So in 2019, Den obtained funding through Primary Health Tasmania and the Tasmanian Community Fund, and then a little bit of top-up funding from the Tasmanian government as well, to develop an AOD peer workforce in Tasmania. So this was then termed the Alcohol and Other Drug Peer Workforce Pilot Project. A bit of a mouthful. And this project commenced in 2020 with Den working with the project partners to recruit, train and mentor AOD peer workers, delivering 3 AOD peer work specific training rounds between 2020 and 2023. So by the end of those 3 training rounds, Den had trained 32 peer workers, a number of whom are now working in these paid peer worker roles. Some peers have also gained confidence and validation to seek other paid employment opportunities in different roles outside of peer work. So what we know in terms of a best practice approach to peer work is that it requires a foundational knowledge base and ongoing professional learning. A thriving AOD peer workforce allows for recognition of prior knowledge and lived experience and an environment of continual professional development to build trust and respect and a high standard of practice. The Alcohol and Other Drug Peer Workforce Pilot Project demonstrated the benefits of specific training to develop skills and knowledge around peer worker core competencies. So the training provided as part of the pilot project equipped the peers with the necessary skills required to work effectively with clients, such as skills applicable to navigating boundaries, confidentiality, purposeful disclosure, and working within a team. We had the benefit of having forming a great relationship and partnership with Victoria's Self-Help Addiction Resource Centre, which a lot of people will know as SHARC. And as part of their strategy for the alcohol and other drug peer workforce in Victoria, they identified 6 key competencies for peer workers, and they were used to inform the development of DEN's peer training program. So those 6 peer competencies are peer workers encourage self-determination. A peer worker's primary focus is on peer-to-peer relationships. Peer workers operate as an equal within a defined role. Peer workers demonstrate the power and possibility of change. Peer workers understand best practice peer work and seek opportunities to increase their knowledge and skills. And peer workers embrace diversity. A well-trained peer workforce is crucial to providing confidence and certainty for services when employing peer workers. The peer workers who completed the training also expressed their interest in continuing training and opportunities to undertake recognised training qualifications to provide suitable recognition of their knowledge and skill development. It's important to note that lived experience in and of itself is not the only essential criteria required to become a peer worker. Peer workers need to demonstrate good interpersonal communication. They may be required to undertake written communication and undertake professional responsibilities. Some of our peer trainees reported that the alcohol and other drug peer work pilot project training program, too many words, had prompted them to reflect on their journey of recovery and had moved them from an identity of a person using substances to instead identifying with the role of being a peer worker. So peer workers also reflected on the importance of appropriate training and a supportive workplace culture, and I think we've heard that already from Callum, particularly around disclosing their lived experience. This aspect of peer work has the potential to reinforce a sense of vulnerability and perpetuate feelings of internalised stigma if it's not supported appropriately within that workplace setting. The concept of purposeful disclosure is an important part of a peer worker role and requires appropriate training and organisational support so that a peer worker can discern what is appropriate and when in terms of sharing their lived experience. And they can then maintain psychological safety for themselves within the workplace setting whilst effectively supporting the client that they're working with. So in 2019, while Den was working with the project partners to develop the AOD peer workforce in Tasmania, on the other side of town, the Mental Health Council of Tasmania developed a peer workforce development strategy for mental health peer workers in Tasmania. And then in May 2022, they released a lived experience peer workforce development strategy implementation plan to implement the recommendations contained in the preceding workforce development strategy. The peer workforce development strategy contained 6 priority areas, and one of those included training and professional development. Within that priority area, peer worker training specifically was an associated goal. So if we skip ahead to November 2022, the Mental Health Council's budget priority submission included seeking funding from the state government and Primary Health Tasmania to establish and deliver a lived experience peer training and development hub. So at that stage, the hub was described as providing entry-level lived experience peer and supervisor training programs, and identified that it could respond to not only the mental health sector workforce needs, but also provides a strategic opportunity to work collaboratively with the AOD sector to deliver outcomes for the AOD lived experience workforce. So the Mental Health Council's budget submission proposed that the hub would provide an opportunity to bring together both the mental health and AOD sectors in the development of a specialised peer training module designed to deliver across mental health and AOD sectors. In the 2023-24 state budget, the Mental Health Council received funding for 2 years for the establishment of a lived experience training hub. This funding was then matched by Primary Health Tasmania, so it's a co-funded project, but it was provided on the condition that the peer work training being delivered through the hub included mental health, suicide prevention, and alcohol and other drug peer work roles. So since that time, we at DEN have been providing advice and feedback to the Mental Health Council to support their development of training materials for peer work training programs delivered through the training hub, which has now been named the LEX Training Hub. So our role in that has been to provide advice and guidance to Mental Health Council staff around how to ensure their training materials are equally relevant for AOD peer workers as they are for mental health peer workers. We've also supported the first delivery of peer worker training through the Training Hub at the beginning of this year as a co-facilitator of some of the components of that training. So it's really important to note that while we have and we continue to provide advice to the LEX Hub team, the content, the method of delivery and duration of the training program don't replicate or match the AOD peer worker training that was coordinated and delivered by DEN between 2019 and 2023. So in terms of the need for AOD specific content in training programs for peers, there's ongoing conversations about the similarities and the differences between peer worker roles across the AOD and mental health sectors. There is agreement that the general principles of navigating boundaries, confidentiality, purposeful disclosure and self-care equally apply, regardless of which sector a peer worker is employed in, as well as agreement in some of the key skills needed to fulfil the roles, such as active listening, communication, and reflective practice. However, there is ongoing concern that the differences in how these principles and skills are used in practice, depending on whether the peer worker role is primarily focused on mental health support or support for substance use, mean that providing the same training to all peers fails to meet the unique circumstances of AOD peer workers in particular. So while we've come a long way in reducing stigma around mental ill health, we haven't even scraped the surface for reducing stigma for those who use substances, particularly illicit substances. So within most workplaces across Tasmania, disclosing lived experience of illicit substance use still carries a significant risk for being treated differently, for being seen in the context of past or current choices, as opposed to skills and ability to undertake the role you're employed to do. So AOD peer workers need additional training and education to prepare for how they might navigate this in the workplace. So in addition to managing the work or team environment, navigating boundaries and purposeful disclosure with clients comes with added complexity for AOD peer workers, particularly in a place like Tasmania, where communities are smaller and people are more likely to know each other. Transitioning from a peer friendship relationship to a peer worker role requires additional skills and training. So more broadly, the concepts of recovery and behaviour change look very different across mental health and AOD settings. At a fundamental level, these concepts linked to treatment and support have different terminology, requiring nuanced training that uses the correct terminology relevant to the peer worker, as well as building skills that specifically relate to how the peer worker may support a person. For example, who is focused on recovery from mental health versus a person who is focused on behaviour change related to substance use. So given these complexities and the fact peer work is still in its infancy for the AOD sector in Tasmania, wherever possible, peer worker training needs to be developed and delivered with specific content depending on which sector the peer worker intends to work in. That's me.
Thank you very much, Emily. Some great insights there, and no doubt we'll have lots of questions coming your way later on as well. We're moving on to our next presenter now, Lily Foster. So Lily has an associate degree in applied health and community support and is a peer worker with the Alcohol and Drug Services Tasmania. And she's also an advocate in our Lived Experience Advocate Service. Lily sits on various boards, including the Tasmanian Health Senate Steering Committee, and she champions the rights of women and gender diverse individuals who use drugs internationally as a member of RIN, the Women's Health Harm Reduction. I'm so sorry, I should have checked on that one. The RIN Strategic Advisory Board. And Lily, if you take it away and help me with that acronym, I'd be most appreciative.
Thanks, Claire. It's the Women's Harm Reduction International Network, RIN. Everyone can hear me, so yep, cool. Hello, everyone. My name is Lily Foster, and I'm a proud peer worker with the Detox at Home team at the Alcohol and Drug Service here in Launceston. My path to this role has been deeply shaped by my own experiences with polysubstance dependence and the therapeutic treatment environment. Once appointed to this role, I was required to undertake shark training along with mandatory training under the Tasmanian Health Service standards. During my own treatment and recovery, and I just want to echo what Callum said about the word recovery, and I have similar beliefs around the use of that word, but I am using it in the context of my work and my own lived experience. So in my own treatment and recovery experience, I engaged with peers regularly, but those interactions were often unstructured and then they were clouded by complex dynamics. In the treatment setting, peer engagement can be a tricky space to navigate, and there was often competition, judgment, and a sense of invalidation. And so for me, what was really missing in my experience was the more intentional form of peer support and a structured form of peer support that was compassionate and rooted in genuine connection. Now, today as a peer worker, I can understand just how valuable this kind of support can be, and I'm incredibly grateful to now offer it to others who are walking their own paths. I'm going to repeat this point a few times because I think it's really important, and that the real strength of peer work lies within its intention. It's not just about shared experiences, it's about it's not just about shared experience, it's about shared experience delivered with purpose and structure. And I believe that this intentionality is what makes peer work so impactful, and it is the secret sauce, if you will, of peer work. Without structure, peer engagement can sometimes actually fall into some unhelpful patterns in my experience. And I also know that from personal experience, while informal peer interactions can be beneficial, they can often come with their own unique complications. There can be a sense of competition and judgment about who and what progress is valid. Now, as a professional peer worker, I can approach my role with transparency and vulnerability, two qualities that I didn't always have the ability to maintain in less formal peer settings. Vulnerability, in particular, in my experience, can feel treacherous in treatment environments. But if they're handled within the structure of a professional peer work, they can become a really powerful tool for connection. And these qualities allow me to engage now with clients on a really deep level, helping them to feel seen, heard, and supported without fear of judgment. Through my work, I've learned that peer support is not just about having lived through similar experiences. It's about creating a professional space where trust and growth are cultivated. And this intentional approach benefits both the clients and the service as a whole. I'm fortunate to work alongside colleagues who see the value in lived and living experience, and they actively integrate my role into the larger team. They always make sure that the peer worker's perspective remains relevant and impactful, and they help me to meet the evolving needs of the service and the clients that we support. And this collaboration is key. It shows clients that people with lived and living experience are treated as equals to the clinicians. And this recognition builds trust in the service and in turn helps clients trust the system more fully. In my work with the Detox at Home team, I primarily support clients going through alcohol detox, and it's a process that I've experienced more than once myself. And this shared experience often creates an immediate connection with the clients, and they know I understand what they're going through because I've been there. I can speak openly and honestly about the realities of detox, relapse, and the process of change, and the clients feel comfortable asking me questions that they usually would hesitate to ask clinicians. They'll often ask me questions like, have you ever, how did you get through this? And questions based on my lived experience that are reaffirming for them, making sure that they don't feel alone. It's stuff that clinicians just can't even scratch the surface of. I've also come to understand that the power of peer work, again, lies in its intentionality. And this isn't just casual conversation. Don't ever think that peer work's easy. It's not. It's intentional, it's structured, compassionate, and respectful engagement. And that said, peer work creates a safe space for clients to express their fears, struggles, and doubts without fear of judgment. Again, peer work isn't without its challenges. Yes, I bring my personal story to the table, but I also carry the emotional weight of hearing familiar struggles from clients who are still in the thick of their experience with a recovery or process of change. And peer work can be really emotionally intense, especially with when clients' experiences resonate closely with my own. And one of the most significant challenges for me has been learning to regulate my own emotions and to manage the deep empathy I can feel for the people that I'm supporting. The line between offering genuine empathy and protecting my own emotional well-being is sometimes thin, but it's a critical balance that needs to be maintained in peer work. And without it, I wouldn't be able to provide the best support possible, and nor would I be able to sustain myself in the role long term. Maintaining emotional boundaries while still being fully present for clients is an ongoing learning process, and it's essential. Peer work, like any other healthcare role, requires resilience, emotional intelligence, and the ability to set professional boundaries. It's really demanding work, and it requires just as much, if not more, emotional and psychological effort as other roles in the sector. And one of the most rewarding aspects of my work is witnessing the trust that peer support can build within the system itself. Clients recognise that people like myself with lived or living experience are treated as equals to the clinicians that they are seeing. And that recognition can shift their perspective on the system as a whole. It sends a really powerful message that the service that they're accessing values real-world experience, and that the recovery process and the process of change is deeply personal, and that's recognised by the service again. And this trust and this connection is when the real healing and process of change can begin. I'll never ever forget a recent interaction that I had with a client when they stopped me in the car park and they said, "Hey, so this actually works. Look at you, Lil." And in that simple statement, they weren't just acknowledging my personal progress, they were recognising the value of the service and the peer support it provides. And in that moment, I was also reminded of the deep connections that we build with the clients simply by existing in the peer worker role. Our presence alone can show clients what is possible. And now, as I'm reflecting on my journey, from someone who was in recovery and in access treatment to someone now helping others, I can see just how essential intentional, structured peer support is. It's not just about having lived through dependence. It's about being a professional who offers compassionate, effective, and purposeful support. And peer work is emotionally demanding and requires a level of resilience and professionalism that really needs to be recognised by the sector. There need to be paid roles. And if I could offer one piece of advice, it would be this: understand that peer work is unique and a highly challenging profession, and it deserves the same respect, training, and support as any other healthcare role because of the impact it has on clients. And the service impact it has on the service as a whole, and it's truly a profound impact. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Lily. That was incredible and so great to have such a good insight into the role that you have and the impact that peer workers have in our sector and the incredible value it brings to people accessing services in Tasmania. So thank you. Our next presenter is Peter Callender. Peter is a, correct me if I said this wrong, Peter, Gestalt psychotherapist with extensive experience in the AOD and mental health sector over the past 30 years. He's currently the Youth Services Lead at the Link Youth Health Service and has overseen the ATOD program at the Link for the past 2 years, embedding ATOD peer workers into the services, the services that the Link provide to young people in Hobart. Peter also continues to conduct his private counselling practice. So welcome, Peter. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks, Claire. I hope people can hear me, and been really wonderful to hear the last three speakers, highlight some of the rewards, challenges, and complexities of peer work role, particularly ATOD peer work. And it really echoes my experience as well, working at the Link Youth Health Service. I think all peer work is contextual. So just to give a bit of a context to our experience here at the Link, the Link works with young people aged 12 to 25. We run an open access space, so it's very much about soft engagement in the open access space that provides, respite, food, phone charging, showers, laundry services to young people, as well as a lot of, emotional support. We're also the lead agency for Headspace. So we're very linked in with the health Headspace allied health professionals. One of the main functions or main programs that we've got at the Link is the alcohol, tobacco and other drug program. And we work from a harm-min approach. And there's kind of 4 different arms of that program. One is structured counselling sessions, outreach to shelters and other places around Hobart, health promotion, and also we have a needle and syringe program on site as well. So that's just a little bit of this kind of space and the service that we've been embedding peer work into. And I use the word embedding when I was reading more about this. My understanding is that integrating peer work into a service really means that you're bringing peer work into an existing service and integrating it into existing services. Very much our role or our goal has been, co-creating peer work driven services, not just fitting peer work into existing program delivery, but very much honouring what peer work can bring in and of itself, and so designing new services that are peer driven in a way. But it's very much an ongoing design process, co-design process. And I really understand some of what Callum was feeding back about lack of role clarity and carving out a real clarity around role and stuff. So many challenges inherent in that embedding of peer work and honouring of it in the space, but very powerful, as Lily mentioned. So we were successful in the first round of peer work grants in 2023 last year. So we started recruiting and I think we interviewed about 6 people for the peer work role, and we had some really impressive peer workers who'd done the DEN training. I think 4 of the 6 applicants had done the DEN training. I was aware of the DEN training, and they really strong applicants, and really it felt like they'd come really well prepared. At the same time, because we're a youth specific service, one of the main factors we needed to consider was the best fit for the context of this role and position. So we ended up actually employing somebody that unfortunately hadn't done the DEN training, but we definitely felt was a clear standout best fit for the role. So they went on to do the SHARK training, which has already been mentioned in Victoria. But prior to that, of course, we needed to get organisationally ready. So 10 of our staff did the SHARK organisational readiness training. So those 10 staff came from program managers, clinical leads, and just on the ground youth health workers, coalface staff. So we had 10 staff do the 2-day organisational readiness training, and then all of those people went back to the different kind of groups of in the organisation and tried to really educate and bring up a real awareness of what embedding peer work into the organisation meant. And for us, that was really, really important to have a real understanding and knowledge and valuing of peer work in and of itself. The Link had actually had a vocational peer worker here in 2022. So we weren't new to peer work, but we were certainly new to alcohol, tobacco and other drug peer work. And as has been mentioned, it's very contextual. Very different stories, very different ideas of what recovery means, all of those sorts of things. So very contextual. So we had our first peer worker work with us from May 23 to March 2024 for 10 months, and continuity of funding has already been mentioned. Unfortunately, due to a little a break in our knowing that we had continuity of funding, we ended up having to let go of our first peer worker because we weren't sure we'd secured funding, which meant recruiting a second peer worker after that other peer worker had moved on. Now, that hasn't been a tragedy. Talking about career progression, that peer worker went on to move into what I think was a great fit for him, a great role in peer work. So, talking about career progression, it was great to know that he went on to another organisation based in Hobart and was able to continue in that ATOD peer work role, even though that lack of continuity of funding for us meant we had to let him go. So we've recently employed another peer worker who started in August and will be with us hopefully till June next year. Recruitment process itself, being contextual, we had to, who do you have on the panel? What are the right questions you ask? This is not a clinician you're employing. It's not a youth worker. This is an ATOD peer worker, employed for very different reasons, but with the same, as Lily mentioned, same value as a professional. So, the design of the questions, who to have on the panel. We always have a youth reference group member on our recruitment panels at the Link to have that, the young person's voice, to get their input and experience of the applicants. I really want to validate, the position description said to have 2 years of active recovery or demonstrated recovery. Really want to echo what Callum and Lily have already highlighted about this word recovery and how different that can be for so many different people, and what it means for us as an employer in terms of going, well, they're recovered enough or competent enough or whatever. Such a rich minefield we don't have time to go into today. So obviously we're a youth specific service, so that was a critical aspect of the choice. Confidentiality in the interviews, comfort of disclosure for the applicants, and the impact on unsuccessful applicants, knowing that this may have been their first application for a peer work role. Just considering all of those things that we needed to consider a little bit more, I think, in this situation than you would with other applicants that may not have been as vulnerable, and that vulnerability has been mentioned by Lily again already. So, as I mentioned, we did the 2-day staff organisational readiness training through Shark Victoria. We found them to be extremely helpful right throughout this process. Our peer ongoing clinical supervision with a peer ATOD peer worker. So it's all peer-led supervision, somebody that can totally relate to their experience, as well as having supervision with one of our clinical leads here, as well as line management. And I'll get onto the support for the peer work a bit more. As Lily said, looking after our peer workers in their role, highly challenging, for a peer worker, very delicate balance needing to really be looked after carefully, as well as wanting to honour the robustness of our peer workers as well. So I'm not looking at them in any special light in that way. So embedding peer work into the existing services, as I said, it's really meant, there's a whole lot of aspects to this. 10 minutes can't do it justice, but you know, any organisation, particularly a very low funded NGO like the Link, we need to balance organisational needs and KPIs with a peer worker direction and ideas. I'd love to have the budget to be hugely creative with how we could embed peer work. We just don't have that luxury. So in any employed role, we have to balance those organisational needs alongside the peer work direction and goals and ideas. So we have drop-in sessions for the young person, and we do have lots of posters up advertising that we've got peer workers here and social media posts. We've had a youth peer worker do lots of different forms of peer work, and again, it's an ongoing design, co-design, and looking at where that can be best utilised. We do a lot of soft engagement for ambivalent young people. So we might have a headspace clinician that's seeing a young person with mental health. They've got some ATOD use, but they're very hesitant or not interested in seeing an ATOD clinician. So often the peer worker might go and just do an introduction in one of those sessions and have a yarn, you know, organised to have a yarn with that person. I love what Lily was saying about intentional. So, you know, all of that comes into the practice of the peer worker. It's not just having a yarn, but in the form of a yarn, there's some intentional peer work going on. So very often that forms a relationship with the peer worker and that young person seeking help, and they may not access the ATOD program or the ATOD clinician, which is fine. It's a very powerful intervention in its own right, meeting them where they're at. So peer workers do outreach all around Hobart at shelters and Wellington Court and different places. We have them do, well, they do health promotions, Tas Pride, Junior Duties, chill out spaces, International Overdose Awareness Day, a whole lot of different events. We take, you know, they come with us into the prison when we go into the prison and do the Ron Barwick Health Expo. Really useful for some of the younger inmates in there to speak to somebody that has been there, done that, you know, and had their own experience. One of the other things that was really powerful with the peer work we had last year was education and training for other organisations. I remember going in with our peer worker into an organisation. He did a presentation on ice use, and I think it blew the 10 members of the family team of the organisation that we were visiting. I think it blew him out of the water. Just his deep understanding of what the reality of that was and his knowledge about that whole aspect of drug use. So, you know, so many different areas where that lived experience can just be so valuable and insightful. So support for the peer worker, that organisational understanding, acceptance and valuing, the peer-led supervision, clinical supervision, line management, very much linking in with the lived experience communities and communities of practice. And as was been mentioned a couple of times already, that role clarity, I think, in terms of care for the peer worker is really critical. And I'm not going to pretend we've done it perfectly. You know, we're only 2 years into this journey. It's an ongoing process, but certainly an awareness that role clarity and role definition really helps contain and support the peer worker in terms of them being really clear on what their role is and being able to really hone that space and being really mindful of trying to limit their exposure to trauma and the trauma of the people they're meeting with and helping them find the boundaries of that with, you know, all of a sudden a young person they're meeting with starts disclosing histories of sexual abuse and all sorts of things. That's not the peer worker space. So for that peer worker, because they'll be hearing that all day if they continue. So just helping them come up with those boundaries about what their role is and what it isn't, and looking at their self-care and their own triggers. So all of that kind of just that extra level of awareness of their vulnerability and caring for them. Role creep, of course, is something we've really had to watch out for. We need to be always mindful of role creep, and part of that meant checking in with the peer workers as soon as they started work and on an ongoing basis about what are your career goals. If you're wanting to move into study and being a professional or having, qualifications, then we need to really protect you around keeping the integrity of your peer work separate from what you've been learning at school, so that doesn't creep into your engagements. And we work collaboratively and we check in with the peer worker all the time and limit their exposure to clinical team meetings, client reviews, clinical language, clinical frameworks, because it's so easy for all that language and conceptualization to creep into those peer work engagements with young people, and it changes the flavor of it. It changes the transactional or the interaction. It changes what's taking place. So really protecting the integrity of peer work and what that relationship means, as somebody said before, equal playing ground. It's not professional with the knowledge, it's equal.
I'm really sorry to jump in on you, Peter. Yep. We are going to have to call time on you.
Okay, thank you.
Such incredible insight. Thank you. I know that the link have gone through a lot of preparation and support for their peer workers, and it's great to hear your insights from an organisational perspective. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Claire.
Our next presentation is from Dr. Holly Emery. Now, Holly was going to be presenting with Maria Duggan, who was the project lead for the Drug Education Network training, and unfortunately Maria is unwell, so not able to present today. But Holly is a lecturer in the School of Psychological Sciences at the University of Tasmania. And in partnership with the Drug Education Network, Holly undertook an evaluation of the recently implemented peer worker program across several sites statewide. Working with Ms. Maria Duggan and Dr. Alison Matthews, this project explored the various ways that the peer worker program impacted the recovery experience from the perspective of clients, peer workers, and other non-peer worker employees. Thank you, Holly, for joining us.
Thank you so much, Claire, for that introduction. I just want to make sure that the slides are working for people. Yeah, fabulous. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming along this morning. It's been so amazing to hear the insights from all our presenters so far. And I think as I go through the results from this evaluation study and what we found about the value of this peer worker program, it's really going to highlight the consistency across everyone's stories in this space. Okay, so just by way of background, we know that the value of integrating AOD peer support workers into rehabilitation services remains largely unexplored here in Tasmania, and we heard from Callum about that earlier this morning. And this is despite the benefits of these services seen in other states and other countries, as well as across other health and wellbeing services as well. And so the aim of this particular evaluation study was to really try and capture what role AOD service providers can benefit from having those peer workers involved in that service, in particular by evaluating what the peer worker program that Maria Duggan implemented alongside Den here in Tasmania. And so to do this, I joined the Den team at the end of the peer worker program to conduct this evaluation study. And between myself and Maria, we interviewed 8 clients, 7 peer workers and 5 organisational employees who were involved with the peer worker program in some way to really explore what their experience of the program was and how it fit within that service. And what I want to highlight this morning is just some of the key findings that we found from this evaluation study. And so based on the reports across all participants, we found these 3 core overarching themes or experiences across all participants: engagement with peer work in various capacities. So the first main finding that we found from our evaluation study was titled Enhancing and Supporting Client Experiences. And this was really there to capture what peer workers did in their roles. And this was able to illustrate as well how peer workers were able to contribute to client-facing engagement with rehabilitation services. And there were 3 core ways that peer workers did this. The first one of I've been there before really highlighted how peer workers were able to use their lived experience in that peer worker role. Next, we had creating a safe place. And this is where peer workers were able to take several steps within their role to establish that psychological safety and safe environments for clients. And they did this in 3 key ways. There was an idea of them just sitting there to be there and present with the clients. There was also an element of consistency that came with the peer worker role that really supported clients to build rapport with those peer workers, knowing that someone was going to be there each week on that particular day in that particular group was something that was really valuable to clients' experiences. And lastly, the other thing peer workers did to help create that safety in that space was supporting clients to share their stories. And the way that they did that was by modelling and that purposeful disclosure of information of their recovery journey so that clients started to feel safe to do that themselves. And lastly, in this space of what peer workers were able to do was this knowledge and communication go-between. And that was really there to reflect how peer workers facilitated a line of communication between clients and other AOD service staff. And this was seen in 2 key ways. Firstly, clients were reflecting on how they felt they could talk to peer workers about anything. And at times when peer workers felt that this information was necessary to pass on to organisational staff, they would do that, or in some instances, they would advocate on behalf of the client. The other way that peer workers were able to facilitate that communication was where clients felt that they spoke not like a textbook. And so by this, I mean clients were reflecting on how in certain services within these rehabilitation settings where educational resources were being provided, peer workers were really able to supplement that material by translating it into real world experiences and being able to provide that really applied example of how that information was relevant for them. We also had this second finding of changing experiences with AOD rehabilitation to really reflect what peer workers were able to achieve in their roles and how this was able to change what AOD rehabilitation services looked like for clients. And they did this in 3 key ways. First, we had hope for recovery, and this really was there to capture how peer workers were able to instill hope, recovery and long-term sobriety for clients. I had a peer worker say to me during one of my interviews with them, a little bit of hope goes a long, long way. And that's actually what we decided to title the manuscript when we published it, because it really embodied what peer work was like in this space. Next, we had Treats Me Like There's Nothing Wrong With Me. And this was there to really capture how peer workers in their roles were able to reduce feelings of stigma by normalising some of the challenges that come with recovery. A key place that we saw this come out across clients, peer workers and organisational staff stories was this idea and experience around relapse and peer workers really being able to normalise that experience. And lastly, we had adding another layer. And this was really to capture how peer worker roles were able to add to the already functional services rather than acting in opposition or competition with other staff there. Peer workers and non-peer worker organisational staff were really able to reflect on how there was already services available there and peer workers were able to add that additional layer of support there for clients. Lastly, we had, and this has been echoed across a range of presenters this morning, but this idea of finding organisational value to really capture how the peer worker role was able to integrate into an already operational rehabilitation service. And there was 3 key findings within this space. As has been mentioned by a number of presenters this morning, needing to negotiate peer worker roles and expectations and what the boundaries of those roles were was something that was challenging as peer work became integrated into the various rehabilitation services. Next, we had this idea of sense of recognition, and this was really about peer workers feeling valued by the organisation that they were working within. And this was generally achieved by the introduction of formalised paid peer worker positions. Peer workers really wanted to be able to be seen as equal to other members of that staff, and the way that that was really validated was for them to receive the same recognition from the organisation as other employees. And lastly, we had I Need a Wage to Live On. And this was really there to reflect the challenges that came when peer workers were only working in that voluntary capacity. Peer workers were reflecting on the value of their work and how much change and that they saw that gave to clients and the value that that had to them as well. But in several instances where paid employment opportunities came up, peer workers had a bit of tension where they needed to make a decision on if they were going to oftentimes have to miss out on those voluntary shifts because they had bills to pay and food to buy. And so that was a really quick overview of what our key findings were from this evaluation study and how that peer worker program was able to sort of integrate into the current rehabilitation services here in Tasmania. But I just want to highlight this final point, that implementing effective rehabilitation services is an essential thing that needs to happen here in Tasmania. And this study really highlighted how peer workers are able to enhance experiences and support clients by utilising their own lived experience to instill hope, promote recovery and reduce stigma. And while there is still ongoing challenges at an organisational level in terms of defining peer worker roles and negotiating payment for services, the overall benefits of peer worker programs really speak for themselves. And importantly, peer workers are able to effectively supplement current rehabilitation services by providing a unique perspective that can help support clients' experience and success within these services. And I just want to take a moment just to acknowledge the funders for this particular evaluation study, Primary Health Tasmania, my fantastic collaborators, Maria Duggan and Dr. Alison Matthews, as well as the rehabilitation services that helped facilitate this study. And lastly, but certainly not least, we are extremely grateful for all of the participants who were kind enough to share their stories and experiences with us as part of this study. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Holly. Amazing overview of the incredible amount of work that got done in that Drug Education Network peer training, as well as obviously the evaluation that you undertook. So congratulations, and on the publication of that paper too. Our last presentation is from Dr. Jackie Hallam, the CEO of the Alcohol, Tobacco and Other Drug Council. She probably needs no introduction to us all here. Jackie Hallam has a Doctor of Philosophy in Political Sciences and Public Policy. I hope I got that right, Jackie. Welcome, and she's going to be speaking to us around the current play of sustainable funding. Thank you.
Thanks, Claire. Thanks, everybody. And I wish I had something good to say, but I can report on what we're currently doing. So I'm the Chief Executive in the Alcohol, Tobacco and Other Drugs Council, which is the peak body for the alcohol and other drug sector. We represent the community organisations across the state, and this one's been on our desk for 2 years plus now. We've been advocating to government to ensure sustainability in funding for peer workers in the community sector. And currently, the current funding is due to run out at the end of this year. So that's 3 months to go, and we have zero indication on what's going to happen beyond that. So one of the last things that we've been waiting for, of course, is the state budget, and we were optimistic that there might be some indication in that budget, and I've gone and I've done all my homework and I've talked to the relevant people, and unfortunately right now as it currently stands there is no indication on a timeline to work this one out, and there's definitely no visibility within the budget process of some future funding for this area. So that means that we need to continue working very, very hard. So I just want to report to the group, and do welcome questions if there is time, that what we're going to do next, we've got a meeting with the acting DepSec of the Department of Health tomorrow. I'll be meeting with the department this week, and I'll be meeting with the Minister's advisor as well in the next either tomorrow or Monday on this one. In the meantime, we have drafted a media release, and we've got four organisations coming on board with us for this one, and these are all the organisations who are currently employing peer workers in the AOD community sector. So this one's going to be a group effort. We always try to be constructive, and we always try to work with our friends in government with regard to these sorts of issues, but this one is now escalating to the state of being urgent. There is a huge risk that we're losing all the good work and momentum, and most importantly, we risk losing people, and we risk losing, you know, the people employed in our community sector right now. So this one's urgent. This one's at the top of our list, and I'll be reporting back to the sector as to how we go when we move forward. So I just want to let everybody know that we are acting on this. We're going to the highest possible channels that we can to seek at least an indication on some information that we can provide to our community sector. And we have already heard that organisations have lost staff because over the last 2 years funding has been fragile. It hasn't been sustainable. So the message right now is enough's enough, and we've got 4 organisations on board and we'll move through. So we'll welcome any comments and reflections on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. We'll open it up for any questions actually for any of the presenters. We have only a few short minutes, so we'll have to keep it quite contained. But if anyone has a burning question, please raise your hand, take your microphone off mute. No, we've answered everyone. We have Kerry, please take the floor.
Thanks, Claire. As Peter was speaking, I was thinking and reflecting on whether or not the Link and other organisations collect data on how client continuity is affected in the organisation by the lack of funding or them leaving for what's perceived as a higher or better role than a peer worker. Do organisations kind of have any future frameworks of how they might integrate peer workers without government funding using organisational funding?
Thanks, Kerry. I can respond to that briefly. Through our database in the ATOD program, we can certainly track any loss of engagement, discontinuity in client engagement that may have been occurring with the peer worker whose funding was discontinued. So yes, we can track that, and any data that we would have, we would be aiming to use to support trying to get ongoing funding. To speak to the second part of your question, I think that would be a wonderful direction to be going. I think, from where I sit, I think until it gains more validity in Tasmania and is seen as more valid by certain powers that sit above us, I think we're going to be relying on government funding at the moment. But a wonderful vision for the future, I think, where peer workers are employed by the organisations themselves. And I do believe there are a couple of organisations already doing that. But I can't absolutely confirm that.
Thanks, Peter. Appreciate your answer.
We've had Jackie add a comment in the chat there saying that some organisations have already had to top up their funding provided in the last 2 years from their reserves. So that was in relation to those organisations that received the grants for peer work funding, which took quite a while to be refunded on the second round as well. So the risk that this is unsustainable in the medium to longer term. Thank you, Jackie. I might take this opportunity to wrap us up. We unfortunately don't have any more time to go through the questions that have already been posed in people's registration, so I do apologise about that. We can add people's email addresses and contact details if anyone wants to reach out through myself. I'll pop my email address in the chat, and we'll be sending out a link with this recording on our website as well. Thank you everyone who presented. Thank you everyone who came along and participated today. It's been a really great turnout and wonderful to see how important peer work is to our sector and to people working in and connected with our sector. So thank you all very, very much, and enjoy the rest of your days.